Hi, I'm James Swallow, Star Trek novelist, and you're listening to Beyond Trek.
Red alert. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Beyond Trek Podcast. In the room today, I've got Big J, Renzo, I'm Dag, and we have special guest author James Swallow. Thanks for joining us, James.
Hey, everybody, good to be here.
If you can't tell from the background, we're here to talk about Coda, specifically how James Swallow got wrapped up in this crazy transitional trilogy of epic proportions. Everybody here has already read Moments Asunder, so there will be a spoiler segment, and you can fast forward to that if you're interested in it, but we'll warn you, if you haven't read Moments Asunder, you'll want to stop then.
And you should read Moments Asunder and read it like now.
Yeah,
it was
like,
fantastic.
just pause and read the book, then come back.
Yeah,
Forget
it's
the audio
short,
book.
just a couple hours. Oh, fair.
Yeah, I got the audiobook because, and I know I told Dag this, but for me to sit down and read a book is like impossible. But with an audiobook, I could listen to it some here, some there, when I was driving, at the gym, going downstairs to take a break, changing laundry, all of that. And that made it a lot easier. And that was my first ever audiobook. So, and that's how I'm going to get the next one in the series. So looking forward to that.
Oh, that's awesome. You know, we got we for a while we weren't doing many audiobooks for Simon and Schuster. It used to be back in the day. They would come out on tape cassette and they would be abridged, and then they kind of went away for a while. But now they're coming back on CD and digital. So a lot of the stuff we're getting released is coming out. Robert Petkoff's doing the voices for it. It's really great stuff. So there's a lot of really great stuff out there for you to listen to if you want to.
Yeah.
I love Robert Petkoff. I've been listening to the Star Trek audiobooks. It's almost like they've had a renaissance with Star Trek audiobooks that kind of mirrors that other Star franchise where there's now sound effects and music. It's not just a turgid read through of an abridged, script.
Just a jump in right there. I've been trying for a while to get Simon and Schuster to do full cast audio dramas, not just like a talking book, but in like a proper radio play. Because myself and my fellow colleague author Una McCormack, we both worked on the Doctor Who franchise and a bunch of other sort of full cast audio dramas. We've been saying for a while, let's do Trek. Let's do something interesting with Star Trek.
Yeah,
it's an idea we've been kicking around, trying to get CBS interested. We've had some conversations about it, but things have been moving very, very slowly. But that's something I would absolutely love to do because it's a fantastic way to tell stories.
Yeah.
How do I drop my card in that bucket? Just asking for a friend.
Feel free to drop a line to anybody at CBS licensing. Talk to Simon Schuster, talk to John Van Sitters over at CBS, talk to any of the editorial team, anybody you think is with their hands on the lever of power, and say like, hey, what, Star Trek audio would be a super awesome idea.
You know what I was just thinking?
That goes for everybody watching this too.
You're talking about Robert Petkoff and his reading of it. I just thought we've at the end of our talking to the three authors of the books, we've got to get that guy. I would love to be able to talk to him, because with my first audiobook, I was not expecting kind of the doing voice impersonation, sort of, or at least sounding different for the characters. And when he got to doing Renee Picard and Beverly Crusher, I was thinking, whoa, that's some good effort there. Having to do kids, Yeah. So Dag, side note, we've got to get Robert Petkoff on here.
We'll get Robert Petkoff. But enough about Robert Petkoff. We're here to talk to James.
Talking to James, yes.
James,
love the goatee. I got to tell you that first. That's epic.
When we interviewed Dayton, he said that plans for this started in about 2018 when Kirsten contacted him about, Picard is happening. And he says at the back of, in the closing of one of these books, that
in the afterword,
that you and David had been having conversations about the kind of the same thing when Dayton got involved, and sat down at the table and had said, basically, yeah, it's a good thought, but here's where Kirsten's taking it. And I was wondering if you remember that conversation, if you wanted to talk about what your idea with David was and how Dayton's conversation changed that.
Well, to kind of cover it in detail, really, you have to dial the clock back even a little further than that, because, we all knew that when Picard was announced, even before we knew what the show was going to be, we knew it was going to kind of put a torch towards what we've done in the novel verse. Because the moment they said, well, we're bringing back Picard, and it's this many years after Nemesis, we were all looking at each other and going, well, that's smack dab in the middle of the Litverse continuity we've all been writing for the last 20 years. This is not going to end well for us, because the rule is, the books always follow the lead the show makes. So we have to bring our stuff into line with them, because that's the way the license works. So we knew that something was going to happen. We didn't really know what the something was, and we didn't know the full dimensions of the way that the show was going to play out. But even just the initial inkling of the idea was kind of like, we were all like, oh, okay, this is going to be a problem for us. So we'd been talking kind of vaguely about this. I think all of us had kind of our rough ideas of like how it would play out. And at the same time, Kirsten came to me and she said, we'd like you to do a Star Trek Picard novel. And I said, well, how's that going to work? Because if you're changing the continuity for this TV show, which you obviously are, and they'd asked me to do a Picard novel, we had a couple of ideas. Originally, the Picard novel they wanted me to do was a 7 of 9 story. If you've seen the show 7 of 9, turns up about halfway through the series. And there's a little bit of backstory, but not a lot, about how she got from the end of Voyager to where she is when she picks up in Picard. And we were talking about writing the novel that would tell that story, is how she got from there to there. So we developed a narrative for, I'm kind of going off on a sidebar here, but stick with me. I will get back to the point. Believe me.
I'm right there with you.
So we developed that story for a little while. And then Kirsten came back to me and said, this is a really good, really strong story. And we're kind of thinking that maybe we'd like to do it on the TV show at some point, because it's just too good to do in a side novel. And I was like, yeah, I can see your point. So we decided that, we keep our powder dry on the 7 of 9 backstory, put that to one side. And so Kirsten said, well, look, we've got some other options here. We're looking at doing a story about Worf becoming captain of the Enterprise E, because of course, remember in Picard turns in his badge and gun and kind of walks out of the door, right?
Right.
And Worf is his first officer, so Worf becomes captain of the Enterprise unexpectedly, in a situation that maybe he didn't want to be captain. He didn't want to take the job that way, right? He wanted to earn it, not just be given it because Picard walks out the door. So we said, that's a story we could tell. And the other story was, what about Riker and Troy on the USS Titan, way back before the events that we see them in the TV show, before their son Thad dies of the disease that he gets and that kind of stuff. And we had these two stories. We're like, could we tell these two stories in one novel? And I looked at it and I said, what, there's too much going on here for it to be one book. This is two different ideas. It's the Worf story and the Riker and Troy story. And I said, I got a lot of love for Riker and Troy because I'd written about them in the novel verse for the Titan novels. And I said, I want to do the Riker and Troy on Titan story. Let somebody else tell that Worf story. So maybe I don't know if that novel actually will happen, but I hope it will, because it sounds like a really cool idea. So I was going to write this novel, but this novel is set in the Picard continuity. And so I'm being sent the scripts to read through, and I'm seeing, okay, that's not compatible, because, we got rid of the Borg in the novels, and the Borg are a very big part of this story. So, okay, that isn't compatible, and this isn't compatible. And I said to Kirsten, I'm telling a Titan story, but Titan is, although it was originated in Star Trek Nemesis, the movie, we made it a living, breathing thing in the novels. So the thing it is in the novel verse, is that also the thing it is in the Picard TV show? It can't be exactly the same thing. It has to be a version of that thing, if you're following it, right? So, So we had a long discussion. So my primary discussion with her was about how to do a Picard version of Titan that would parallel the novel verse version of Titan. And I'm writing all of this stuff while in the back of my head we're thinking about the Coda trilogy at the same time. Even at one point I actually said to Kirsten, maybe we should do the Coda books first and then I do the Picard novel. And she's like, no, we want to do it in this order. So for me, I kind of did cart before horse, right? I wrote a TV verse, new TV timeline novel, which is The Dark Veil, my Star Trek Picard. And then I had to come back and do the Coda thing. So for me, the order of it was kind of all a bit weird. And in amongst all of that happening, these ideas are bubbling away. It's like, if we have to bring the curtain down on the novel verse, how are we going to do this? And I've got to tell you, I was not a fan of the idea at all. My first reaction, I talk about this in, every one of us has done an afterword in each of the books.
Oh, good. I greatly enjoyed Dayton's.
Yeah, and so you're going to get the same. You're going to get the same thing from me. You're going to get the same thing from Dave in each book, because I think Dayton said this. I heard him do an interview recently with Literary Treks, and they asked him about that, and he said he felt that it was the first time he had ever written an afterword in one of his books, and he put it in there because he felt this was such an important thing that he wanted to get his position across. He wanted people to understand this is where my head was at when I was writing the book. And we all said, you know what, we all should do this, not just because of the position the series is going to fill, but we also felt like if this is us kind of signing off on the novel verse, we want to walk out and kind of have this last moment and go, this is why I made these choices, so people will understand where it came from and understand the kind of the thought process that we had. So we were talking about all these different ideas. How do we bring this stuff together? How do we come up with an interesting process that will be a dynamic story that people would really like, but also something that kind of honors and does justice to everything that has come before in the last 20 years. And I just couldn't see a way through it. And the guys came to me and said, we want you to be part of this. And my initial reaction was negative. I was like, the fanboy part of me was like, no, this is a terrible idea. This is something, I do not want to do this. I do not want to say goodbye to this. I don't want this, what is it Picard says? I don't want the game to end.
Oh.
And I had this really strong visceral reaction to it, and that was my fanboy heart there going, no, we can't end this. It can't end. But then I realized I don't have a choice, really. This is going to end, and this is the way things are going to play out. So you can dig your heels in and hope it doesn't happen, or you can do something about it. And it was Dave Mack who Dave talked me around. I have to be honest, right? It was I was over in New York for the Thriller Fest convention, and it was 4th of July weekend. And we went out he said, come along, we're gonna go out for a barbecue. And we went to a barbecue, a house of a friend. Keith D. Candido was there, another Star Trek writer. Glenn Howman was there, another Star Trek writer. There were a lot of sort of Trek nerds in the house that day. And, and the beer flowed, and so did the brisket. And, and we were having a really great time. And Dave said, let's just, sneaky fella that he said, let's just sit down and have a talk about this.
After he got you liquored up?
Yeah, come here, look it up. Yeah, we were all pretty lubricated at that point. But damn him if he didn't talk me around. And he said, and I think that the thing that he said to me that really made me kind of decide I wanted to be part of it is he said, if we don't do this, who will? If we don't do this, who can really do justice to this? Who are you confident in? Who could do it? Are you confident in your own skills as a writer? And I thought, do I really want to walk away from this fantastic opportunity? And I kind of looked past my initial reaction, and I thought, even though this is an ending to something, I wanted to be part of it. I wanted to be able to pay respect to all the writers that I've read, because I'm a reader as well as, I was a Star Trek novel reader before I ever started writing them. I used to write the official reviews for the official Star Trek magazine here in the UK. I did that for years before I even started professionally writing Star Trek fiction. So I've read a lot of Trek novels, and I have a lot of respect for the writers. And a lot of the Trek authors are also people. When I was starting out as a writer, the first people I met who were professional writers was Diane Duane and Peter Morwood, a husband and wife couple, who wrote some really fantastic Star Trek books. They were the first people who ever listened to the younger version of me saying, hey, I'd like to be a writer, who treated me with respect and said, this is a thing you really could do. So I have a lot of love for these books and a lot of love for the work that went into them and the people who created them. So I thought, I need to be part of this. And once we started having that conversation, we started assembling the ideas. The whole thing just kind of caught fire, figuratively or literally, to be quite honest. And we just started assembling these ideas. And little by little, the three of us got together and started kind of creating out of whole cloth how we were going to tell this epic conclusion. So Dave and I stitched together some stuff, and then Dave went off and did another convention. I went back home to the UK. Dave went off to do a convention in the US, And I remember he told me he brought the ideas to Dayton, and he said, so this is what we're thinking. And Dayton said, dude, it's much worse than you think.
That's his quote from his afterward, yeah.
And it was like, okay, and away we went, you know, and then it became kind of almost like weekly Skype meetings, like we're doing that right now, where we would, we would be chatting. We still have we had a chat sort of room set up as well, so we would have like Skype conversations, and then we'd also be chatting on Twitter and stuff like that, and just throwing ideas backwards and forwards. The chat group was called Wormhole Death Cannon, and that's
your new band, right?
Yeah.
And that's canon with one N, not two.
Ooh.
And so and that's an obscure joke which will become clear as the novels go on, and what that actually means. So and we had a lot of fun doing it, and it was it's been a weird bittersweet kind of project to work on, because on the one hand we have we've been playing with such huge stakes, and all of everything's all in, all the chips are in the basket. It's just everything's going on, and loads of things being pulled in different directions, and we've been taking really big swings, but it's also bittersweet, because we know what we are doing is we are kind of running down the curtain on something that's been going on for 20 years, something that has given me so much, not just personally but also professionally.
Well, I'm sorry, Lorenzo, go ahead.
No, you first.
So there was a part that you said that really interested me just recently, was that now this is going to happen. You were told this is going to happen. You didn't like it. You're kind of against it. Didn't want to do it. But at that point, because this is happening regardless, did you have the sense of, well, I don't want to be, even if I don't like what's happening and I'm against the idea, I don't want to be on the sideline watching it happen anyway, because I know it's going to happen, and not be involved? Because do you think you were going to have that feeling of, okay, now I'm reading it, I rejected this idea, but now that I'm reading it, I could have done so much better. I should have been involved in this. Now you've got regret on top of everything else, that, well, even if I didn't agree with it, I should have been a part of it, so that I'm not losing sleep every night thinking, this is what I should have done, this is what I would have done if I had been involved, even grudgingly. Is that kind of the feeling that you had?
Yeah, you kind of talking about like FOMO, right? Kind of fear of missing out.
Yes. Yeah, FOMO.
There's definitely a little bit of that. I mean, I can say hand on heart, there's a whole bunch of really talented writers there, and I'm absolutely sure that if I couldn't have done it, they would have got somebody else who would have done an equally good job. I mean, we wanted to have more writers involved in this. I mean, I don't know if Dayton said this in the conversation you had with him, but originally we had the idea of it was going to be 4 books, not 3. And
he said 5.
There's even talk about making more, there's even talk about making it more than that, and we wanted to have other writers involved. Again, I mentioned earlier my colleague, Una McCormack, is a really brilliant writer, and I would have loved to have Una on board with this project. The timeline that we were on, we just couldn't make it happen.
Yeah, I read Una's Picard novel.
Yeah, and she's her work is just sublime, and I'd love to have seen her sort of put her kind of energy into this project. And sadly, it wasn't to be. But there's still, she's still going to continue to write for Star Trek. She's got another Picard novel coming out, Second Sight, I think early next year, and that's going to be fantastic. So it's not like we're not going to see any more work from those other writers. But but to go back to your point, Big J's point is, I think that there was part of me didn't want to do it, but then the other part of me, I think the bit that Dave kind of leaned on was, this is a unique opportunity. When would I ever have the chance to do something like this again? I've worked on in the Warhammer 40,000 franchise. I worked on the Horus Heresy storyline, which is a mega epic of kind of 50 plus novels that's gone on for years and years and years. And that's a story of similar scope about an intergalactic civil war, about huge cosmic events and stuff that, massive sort of plot lines colliding and huge. That's of a similar scope to the timeline was much more compact. And so it was that much more intense to try and get, you know, the whole story out there. At the end of the day, it was an opportunity that I would have been a fool to turn down.
Renzo,
Well, it's better to be
did.
involved in it than not. Let's hear it, Renzo.
Well, so first, Cadia fell before the guard did, which is very important to remember as far as the Horus Heresy is concerned. But so I've got a couple questions about some of your other works in the Star Trek Litverse, right? Some things that, you know, I thought were very impressive, and I was wondering if at any point you'd considered other works, essentially, or bringing some of those things in. Now, when we talked to Dayton in particular, he mentioned that you guys had free reign over pretty much the whole Litverse. You were in contact with other authors and talked about their characters and such, and you respected their wishes with regards to the paths of those characters. So I was wondering, since you worked on the Star Trek Titan synthesis books with those holographic avatars for ships, did you consider anything along those lines being brought into the Coda trilogy, or some sort of like additional interfacing for the computers? Because to me, that strikes me very strongly of Andromeda Ascendant, another Gene Roddenberry kind of idea. Was anything like that considered at any point?
Yeah, I mean, I thought about bringing back some of the characters that I'd created. I mean, one of the things that we've tried to do in the trilogy is pay respect to the works of other writers and the crews. And, you know, we made a big list of like, well, who are the other characters that we know are out there? There's you know, the crew of the Gorkon, from Keithy Candida's.
Yeah.
There's the crew of the
Prometheus as well. You guys wrote out. Yeah.
You know, we were trying to like this, like, can we even if in the smallest possible way, can we just, even if it's just a shout out, saying, oh look, there's the Starship Prometheus just kind of over there in that fleet, just to give everybody as much as we possibly could some kind of nod and some kind of shout out, saying like, you know, we see you, we remember you, we respect the work that you did, is that you are part of this ending as much as you've been part of the whole continuity. And so because of that, while I did think about bringing in my own stuff, I thought it wasn't really the place for me to be kind of too self-indulgent, because I'm already writing a novel. And I thought, I don't want it to be all about, we're just going to talk about the bits of Star Trek that Jim invented. You know, that's not what this is not about me reminding everybody how great my Star Trek is. It's about me reminding everybody how great all of our collective effort is.
That's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
I did think about that, but I thought it would be ungenerous of me to kind of pull the spotlight back to my own characters. I wanted to kind of broaden it and say, this is an opportunity to have all of these characters, as many as possible, kind of come on screen and have their moment in the spotlight, even if it's just a few lines of dialogue, even if it's just a short scene, to bring these characters on and give them a moment that feels real and true to who they are.
And so was anything out of bounds then? Were there any authors who you were like, well, we obviously can't touch the Judith Reeve Garfield's Shatnerverse novels, but like, were there any other like sets or stories that you guys were just like, we can't reference this, we're not allowed to, kind of thing?
Well, it's funny, people always talk about the Shatnerverse as being like a kind of separate timeline, and it's kind of soft canon.
Yeah.
You know, a few times I have kind of like, I put a couple of references to Shatnerverse stories in my novels. Nobody's really ever kind of picked me up on it. I just do it for fun, you know.
See if they're paying attention.
Kind of but I mean, the only, not so much off limits, but you know, we had a long discussion with Kirsten about what she'd done with Voyager and the Full Circle fleet, you know, and the way that she tied off the Voyager novels didn't dovetail with what we were going to do with Coda. And we said, well, you know, the Voyager stuff's kind of gone off way off over there, and the Coda stuff is heading in way off over here. And we do have some cross-connecting material. There are some Voyager characters who do turn up in the novels, but
Torres and Paris is so far, I think, the only two, right?
And Tuvok too.
Oh, that's right.
Spoilers, jerk.
Small spoilers.
In fact, I got to write a couple of scenes with Tom Paris that I really enjoyed doing in Ashes of Tomorrow. We had a lot of fun writing him into it. So that wasn't so much off limits. It was just kind of, we were respecting the choice that Kirsten had made with those novels, and we tried to do that with all of the other authors as well that we worked with. Is saying, you know, well, where did you leave these characters? What did you do with them? You know, what direction can we take them in that you're going to be happy with? And hopefully we've done that. And we tried to also, you know, even as much as we possibly could, any sort of hanging threads from previous novels, stuff that hadn't been explained away, if we could find a way to kind of say, well, this is what happened with that, even if it's, again, just one line of dialogue, just somebody just going, oh yeah, this thing happened, just to sort of tie off as many possible bits as we could before we run the curtain down.
Yeah, no, I think you guys did a great job with using exposition to do so without it being like ham-fisted or ham-handed feeling. So I thought that was really, really good. I actually really like that in stories when they go back, not only reference some continuity, but like explain it further to make it more have more verisimilitude with the rest of the story. So I really like that about the first book at least. I can't read the rest yet.
I mean, that's the intention. Sorry, yeah, go ahead, man.
I'd like to talk about canon. And this was something that I talked to Dayton Ward a little bit when we had that interview. So, as you know, when it comes to the film and movies, canon is, you're going to have fans out there that are meticulously watching and noting and picking up anything in canon, whether it's a prequel series like Enterprise or Discovery and Coming Up Strange New Worlds, or even the Picard series or anything going forward. There's always this kind of a watchdog group that's checking for any deviation from canon. And speaking with Dayton, it sounds like that is also maintained with the writers. You try to anything that was done in the past in the lit verse is honored going forward. And so what I asked him, and I'd like to ask you as well, is that how far back into the books do you go to make sure you're not just completely or blatantly trampling over something that happened, because the lit verse is its own canon. So in a way, just like the films and TV series, they can't just go off the reservation from a prior or forthcoming series or movie. And it sounds like it's the same with the books. But however, the books are, my assumption is, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, the book verse is probably not consumed and absorbed as much as the episodes in the movies. So even with the writers, it may be that unless you've read, how many Star Trek books have there been? I mean, is it safe to say? Okay, three. Well, I mean,
400 or 500,
like all time, going back even to the 90s, 80s, 90s.
Pocketbook and everything. Yeah, probably close to 500 then.
Yeah.
Okay, really? I was thinking it would be. Okay, so then that's not nearly as many as I thought. But anyway, to get to my point, how do you keep up with canon from all the books, from all the different authors? Do you literally have to make sure that you're with a group of people like I am with Dag and Renzo? Between the three of us, we can very well cover the gaps in memories and episode names, what happened here and there. Is that the same on the book first side? You've got to have a group you're with that can really pull from all 500 novels and say, oh, well, no, wait, you can't do that because in this novel 15 years ago, this person did that.
I mean, we're self-checking, right? So, you know, we have the other authors, especially on a collaborative project like this, plus we have the editors. So everybody is kind of double checking everything. I'm not going to say we're perfect because there's always an error that sneaks in. You know, I know absolutely positively there's going to be a mistake somewhere in the Coda series. There's going to be something we got wrong. And
on a typo.
You know, someone's going to say like, oh, you know, that character's still alive and he was supposed to be dead, or he's dead and supposed to be alive. And, you know, there's going to be a mistake we made. We're only human, you know, we're not perfect, but we try our best to be as close to perfect as we possibly can get. I mean, in terms of like the canonicity of the lit verse, I mean, if you go back to the novel Avatar, which was kind of we kind of think of that as being the sort of the current phase. If you think of it like remember how they say with the comics where you have like Golden Age comics, Silver Age comics, Bronze Age comics. I think if you look at the Bronze Age of Star Trek litverse, it kind of starts with Avatar, and after that point, that was when there was a kind of concerted effort where we were all kind of saying, let's try and make sure everything meshes together. Then if you look before that, you have the Silver Age stuff, which is like the early pocketbooks material where some of it cross connects and some of it doesn't, and some of it is completely isolated and some of it is completely crazy and out there and could never fit with anything else. And then you go back to, and you have the Golden Age stuff, which is where the really early books, where you have the Bantam stuff and the James Blish novels, books like Spock Messiah and Spock Must Die and stuff like Trek to Mad World, all those kind of early ones, which exist completely in their own continuity, and some of them are just really, really out there. So I would say anything in the Bronze Age era, anything from that kind of Avatar onwards, we all made an effort to either read it or, if not, be knowledgeable about what takes place in those stories and try to kind of keep the continuity as close as possible from that point onwards. And that is the kind of, that's the sort of the 20-year period of sort of contemporary Trek lit where it became serialized. After the end of Deep Space Nine, after the end of Voyager, where we said, instead of just telling isolated stories, we're going to carry those shows on. So, this show ends at season 7, but the books are going to be season 8, 9, 10, 11. We're just going to keep on going with those characters and keep on building on that serialized narrative. And Coda is an ending to that era of Star Trek fiction. So I guess whatever comes next, the Platinum era, whatever you want to call it, right? The books that come next, that will be existing in a new continuity.
Okay, so let's talk about the Bronze era. And it sounds like from the way you described it, the Gold era is its own thing. Whatever they did, the Silver era is its own thing. Bronze, it's like, okay, here's our demarcation point with what we're doing. If we can, if we're able to honor and not completely contradict the Gold era or the Silver era, great. But we're kind of like, this is our version of the New 52, like from the DC Comics. That this is our thing. Now, once you establish that, did it become this setup where any author that's going to be involved in the Bronze era, this is our group? There's not going to be someone writing a novel in this era that we don't know about. That's not part of this group. It needs to be, if you're going to do this, you need to be part of this collaboration. There's no independent writer that might be looking at your stuff. You need to have them in the room or on a call with you. Did you guys take it upon yourselves to make it a group effort that if you're going to do a novel in this part, then you need to be brought in on the inner circle to make sure we're keeping things serialized and consistent?
Like, did you have a primer, essentially, a primer for new authors who are going to write their first book, something to catch them up or help them out?
No, nothing like that at all. It was much more informal than that.
Okay.
I mean, it was more along the lines of, there was never kind of like, a gateway saying, unless you're part of this in-group, you are not going to get to write a Star Trek novel. There's never anything like that. Because I think everybody who came on to write a Star Trek novel already had a level of expertise and knowledge about the material, because you have to have that, because you wouldn't even be coming into the job if you didn't already know the background and the material. So there was already kind of an expectation that you had to have a level of knowledge about it before you even kind of pick up your pen. And then past that point, I think there was just a sense, I think, amongst all of us as writers, is that it's just respectful to pay respect to the work of the other writers. So what you would do is, I would get an email from another writer saying, "Oh, Jim, I noticed you did this thing in this book with this character. I'm going to do this other thing. Do you have any input or thoughts?" And, it could be down to like, please don't kill that guy off because I want to use him in another novel, or go nuts, do whatever you want, or, here's my thoughts on the backstory of this character, but you feel free to do whatever you want with it. It was much more collaborative and much more free and easy. There wasn't a structure to it. It was just, a group of people making themselves available. So if somebody comes in and says, I want to write this story and I want your opinion on it, that opinion is there. If they want to write the story and they want to do it their own way, they can do it their own way. Because ultimately, at the end, it's the editor's choice to decide about if something feels like it's not in continuity. The editor is the one who makes the final decision about that and says, well, maybe you can't do that in your novel because it contradicts this book, or you can't do that because it contradicts this TV episode. That decision is made at a level kind of above the writers. But the sort of the bedrock of the writers, that sort of collegiate space where we can say, like, we're all here. You want to work together with us? And the door is always open. That's
So
the
you
kind
didn't.
of. that's the kind of I guess the kind of
Atmosphere.
environment you create.
That's really cool.
So you didn't have and I know Dax got a question real quick. So you didn't have any writers that were just going off the reservation. For example, we talked about the big event, and for anyone listening or watching, there's going to be some spoilers on previous Trek books. But for example, some of the big things that happened in the in the Bronze Era, like ending the Borg, you didn't have anyone come in, whether it was that or the death of Janeway, and decide, well, in my novel, I'm going to do a story about the Borg or include this character, and I'm just going to do my own thing and not even worry about what those guys did. And I'm talking about those big deviations. Weren't you taking a chance that somebody would come along and just do that and kind of wreck what you're doing? Is that something that the editor would just say, hey, you know, you haven't really worked with these guys, you're doing this thing, but we've got to tell you, it deviates too far from what's already happened, that you can't have that big of a contradiction?
Yeah, I mean, if someone had come in, say, like you're talking about, like the Destiny trilogy, that Dave Mack wrote, which was basically where we got rid of the Borg. So hypothetically, let's say if an author came in after the Destiny trilogy had been written and said, I've got this great idea for a Borg novel, what they would have got is, we'll stop you right there. Because that person would not have written that book, because they said, we're not going to do a Borg novel. You know, I mean, Shatner got away with it because he's William Shatner, right? Shatner can do everything in the Shatnerverse. But if someone had turned up after a big event had been changed, you know, after Janeway was killed off, I mean, we brought Janeway back later, right? But if someone had come along and said, I want to do a Janeway story about Captain Janeway doing these things, and say, well, no, she got promoted to Admiral and she got killed, so you can't tell that story.
Right.
So it wouldn't have even, word one would not even have been written.
Okay.
Welcome to fanfic.
Right. There's other ways to publish this if you must.
Right. So,
I've talked to some writers, like new fan writers as well, who want to kind of make the jump to being professional writers, and they said, well, you know, that's too restrictive. That's I can't work like that. And my answer is like, well, then you're not going to do this for a living, because that is the nature of what tie-in fiction is. As I said this at the top of the show, is we are led by the decisions that are made by the show, and to a lesser degree, we're led by the decisions that the licensors are made. So if a licensor says, for example, we don't want any Deep Space Nine novels, we're not going to tell any Deep Space Nine stories, and then you come to them and say, I want to tell a Deep Space Nine story, they're going to go, we're not going to change our mind for you. That decision was made at a corporate level. That's done.
Right.
And that's, yeah, I mean, that would never happen, to be honest, because it's not like they're going to stop doing DS9 stories. But you see the point I'm making, right?
Yeah.
It's if a decision had already been made, for another writer to just come in and go, I'm just going to completely ignore that, well, you know, rude, don't you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
At the basic level, right?
Yeah.
But also,
now you're blacklisted.
Yeah, it's like, you know, I don't think nobody would ever be blacklisted. You know, we're much too friendly for that kind of thing. It's more like if somebody came in and said, I want to do a thing that rides roughshod over everybody else's work, we would have had a polite conversation with them and said, like, do you really want to do that? Isn't there a better story that you could tell? You know, if you're talented enough to have got into the room, why is it the first thing you want to do is, you know, reverse something that somebody else had done? Why not tell a really cool story of your own? You know, we're a big friendly team, and we've always been. I've always felt like it's been very, very welcoming, and I think, you know, it just seems much more likely to me that a writer would come in and we'd say, like, welcome, you know, come on in, the water's lovely. We've got there's so many great stories out there to tell. Why limit yourself to undoing something that's already been done?
Well said.
Speaking of the level of collaboration that you have with the other writers, I want to take this back to Ashes of Tomorrow. How did you navigate the responsibility of grabbing the loose end from Moment Asunder and weaving that into Oblivion's Gate? Well,
you know, when you say it like that, you look at the covers of the books and you see Dayton's name, my name, Dave's name, and it looks like what you're looking at is three discrete objects, And that is not what that series is.
Ooh.
Because the three of us sat down, although obviously I wrote the middle book, Dave wrote the last book, Dane wrote the first, we physically sat there and typed those words out. But the entire story concept, the whole thing, the whole object that is Star Trek Coda is the creation of the three of us. If you look in the opening page of the book, you'll see something that's a unique credit. I don't think it's ever been done with any of the Star Trek books. Is you'll see where it says Star Trek Coda, written by Dayton Ward, James Swallow, and David Mack. And the three of us share credit for the creation of the whole storyline because we created it together. It was a collaborative effort that we sat there and we decided we're going to tackle this like we're writing a television miniseries. We're going to break the story piece by piece down into elements. We're all going to collaborate. We're all going to put story ideas together, and we're all going to discuss how this story comes together. And it was, it was even kind of late in the stage of development when we decided who was going to write what book. Because originally, in the early stages, I was going to write the first book in the series. And then I couldn't make the scheduling work. And we discussed it and we said, look, it's better if Dayton does the first series, I'll do the second book. I think we always felt like Dave was going to be the guy who would end cap it. I think pretty much Dave's position as tail end Charlie kind of coming in there and like finishing it off and bringing that final closure to the story, because he's so good at that sort of thing. He's really good at doing the big swings, these massive sort of cosmic events. And we always felt like, Dave should be the guy who kind of, carries it to home plate for us, as it were. Whereas, Dayton and I were discussing, well, who goes first and who goes second. And that was just that was purely like whose calendar works best, so that's how we ended up deciding the kind of the running order.
So you always knew that David was going to be the last one.
Yeah, I always felt like that he was the best man for that job. So, but building the entire structure of the narrative was very much a group effort, and it's great because it feels like, for me as a writer, there's a little bit of my creation in Dayton's book, and there's a little bit of me in Dave's book, and the same for them. Is each of us have a kind of our little fingerprints on everybody else's story, because it was such a group effort to create this sort of epic trilogy.
Hi, Dr. Phil Phlox, also known as John Billingsley, speaking. I am the president of the board of the Hollywood Food Coalition. We serve terrific multi-course meals to the unhoused and to those in need 7 nights a week. We assist as many as 100 nonprofits with their food needs, buttressing extraordinary social service programs. We work with community partners to address issues of food insecurity here in SoCal. We do lots of other great stuff, but how much time do we have? If you're in LA, come and volunteer with us at hofoco.org/volunteer, and any Federation credits you can spare go a long way.
So when it comes to figuratively, you guys were like locked yourselves in a studio or a house or apartment together and said, we're gonna live together figuratively on this and work as a group. That's a big collaboration. That, that reminds me of, I don't know if you're a Marvel fan or not, but for the Infinity War series, those 20 movies that came up before the end of the saga, it was the same thing. Everyone needed to be on kind of the same page. Was, yes, you have your individual story, individual kind of movie-ish, but this is the end goal. So you need to keep that in mind, carry that thread when you're working with all those directors and story writers. So for you guys, you all have to be knowing what you're all thinking and doing. So was there storyboarding involved? Do you guys have a big like chalkboard or whiteboard, and this is what I'm doing, this is what we need to do, this is what we need Dayton to set up, David to close on, et cetera, et cetera? Was it like that kind of setup?
Yeah, a little bit like that. I mean, it's funny you talk about the Marvel movies. One of the touchstones we had is we were saying, this is our Infinity War endgame. This is us. We're definitely kind of one-eyed looking towards that as well. And And also people have talked about nicknamed this Crisis on Infinite Tracks, kind of.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
It is.
And the original, going back to the original DC Crisis on Infinite Earths comic book miniseries, and definitely, I'm a long-time comics nerd as well, so there was definitely a little bit of that as well. I think, touching on both of those kind of things. But in terms of the magic whiteboard sort of thing, Dave Mack is just awesome at these things, and he put together. I hope we get to show it to people. Maybe when we're all completely done, and spoilers are all out there. Maybe he'll put this thing up online. He drew this incredible, complicated timeline diagram.
Oh, nice.
Of where all of the events take place and all the events that we refer to throughout the novels, and these branching universe things. It's a work of mad genius art. It's like, it's almost like, your conspiracy wall with the guy with the threads going in different directions and stuff.
I love that.
The guy wasn't that from Always Sunny in Philadelphia?
I mean, it's been in a million things.
I thought it came from Lower Decks, so.
Yeah, so it's kind of, so they drew up this timeline, which was great, and actually that was it was part of our pitch package as well, because I remember when we were taking it to CBS licensing, they were like, we trust you guys with this because you've got the experience to do this, but we're not quite getting what you're doing. And Dave's like, I'll draw you a picture, and Dave drew them a picture and went, this is it. And they're like, oh, okay, now we see. Because it's the thing I say about this story is it's not complicated, but it is complex.
Yes.
And there are a lot of moving parts, and there's a lot of stuff to kind of, pay attention to. So it's like, you have to, things that you'll read kind of maybe in moments asunder, which will seem like a small aside, and it doesn't seem like it matters, will pay out in ways you don't expect when you read Ashes and Oblivion, as the books move on. So we had that the diagram, and we also had like a kind of Excel spreadsheet as well, working out the timeline. It's like, who's going to be where, how long is it going to take to get from this place to that place, what characters are going to be on what ship when what thing happens. That was something we were constantly working out, is like, can I have this guy? No, you can't, because he's on that ship. Okay, well, I need him on my ship. I need him on this ship to do this. I need this character on the Defiant to do this thing, but that character's on the Enterprise, so we need to get them to the Defiant via Deep Space Nine while doing this. And we're, and once we structured all those things out, it was very useful as well, because we would find like characters in certain places and certain positions. Suddenly we go, oh, if these two characters are together in this situation, let's write that scene. Let's write these characters in the same room together. And we were finding that because we're bringing characters together from all across all of the televised Star Trek, we realized on a few occasions that we were doing scenes that were the very first time those characters were in a room together. And suddenly it's like, oh, you can't let that pass. That opportunity to have this character and this character. I mean, I'm being very careful here because I'm not going to say which characters they are, because I don't want to spoil anything. Mm-hmm. Where we could have these moments where these two characters meet for the first time. It's like, well, if we're going to do that, we want to have a little bit of fun with it, So that was interesting, because that was something I think in the evolution of the story we weren't expecting to find that, and we would find these little nuggets of undiscovered stories. Like, oh, here's a moment to tell something that we weren't expecting. Here's a cool opportunity to fold something into the greater narrative that we were creating. And that was part of the whole joy of that process, was for me just being in a room with two really talented writers, virtually speaking, right, and just jamming on story ideas. I imagine it's like, when jazz musicians talk about how, one guy starts noodling around, another guy starts playing something, and then before you know it, you have a great piece of music. I've always felt like that when I'm working with really talented writers, because you come in and nobody wants to be the one who lets the side down, right? Everybody wants to bring their A game to it. So you pitch like, well, here's my best idea. And then somebody else goes, well, here's my cool idea. And when the ideas kind of mesh and merge, it's not like it's 1 + 1 = 2. It's more like a geometric progression. It's like your idea cubed, and suddenly it's like, oh, but wouldn't it be cool if we did this? And if we did this? And suddenly the energy and the excitement comes out of it, and man, it's just so cool to be part of a process like that. And I'm hoping that it kind of comes out on the page.
Oh, I think it certainly comes out on the page. But I've got one last question before we move into our spoilerful section where we'll just talk about like the actual guts of Moments Asunder too. So my last question is actually about the video games in my background, right? Star Trek Invasion, thought was a great PlayStation game. I actually read through your AOL homepage at one point many, many years ago before it went down, where you explained a lot of like your work on it. I don't remember all of it, but I remember that it was yours, right? So I actually wanted to ask you about this because I know that it's a licensing nightmare. But at any point in your years since working on Invasion, did you ever consider bringing some of the content that you invented for Invasion into the Litverse somehow, like the Kamjate or the Typhon, anything like that, like any of the characters? Like, is that even possible with the literary like rights as they are?
Oh, you are damn right I did. Yeah, I've never had the opportunity to do it. It's the main character in the game. Lieutenant Cooper is the character. Lieutenant, he's Ensign Cooper in the game.
He's the PC. Yeah.
I wanted to write him in as a character on board the Titan, just as a nod to my own continuity. Even if he just kind of walked in the room and handed Riker a clipboard, right? I could just say, look, there he is. It's part of Star Trek continuity. But I just never had the opportunity to do it, you know. And it was really fun working on that project because it was the very first video game I ever worked on, and I kind of stumbled into the job. I mean, we're gonna go on a little sidebar here, but this is a great story I'd like to tell it. I was working for the official Star Trek magazine in the UK, and I was doing some promotion because I'm a big gamer as well. So they sent me off to cover this event about Star Trek video games, and the guys who were building Star Trek Invasion, which at the time was called Star Trek Red Squad, if you remember the Red Squad from Deep Space Nine.
Yep.
And the guys from Red Squad, the guys from the Red Squad development studio, were talking to me about this. And they had a very early build of the game, and they said, "We're using resources from this Star Trek magazine article that's really good." And I said, "Oh, I wrote that." And they said, "Oh, we should probably hire you then to kind of come and work with us." So I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." And they were a great bunch of guys, but they weren't very Star Trek savvy. And they were like kind of like, "Well, this ship's hyperdrive," and I was like, "It's warp drive." And they're like, and then the laser cannons, I'm like, they're phasers. It's like, and I was like, you know, guys, why don't you let me just take over here and I'll do this for you, you know. And so I came in and I kind of Star Trekked it up for them, and we had an absolute blast putting this game together. And I really enjoyed it. You know, we did talk about a sequel at one point, which was going to be for the PlayStation 2. That never got off the ground. And there was even a talk about we were going to do a tie-in novel to follow on with the storyline.
Would have been so good.
I know, right? You know, I pitched it. I think somewhere I still have the outline for it. But the game wasn't as big as a success, sadly. If we'd have done the sequel game, maybe there would have been a time. But you know, but it was fun. It was a very fun project, and it's always going to have a lot of love in my heart because it was kind of the first big Star Trek thing I got to work on in the video game world. My first big video game project.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. So Invasion's one of the very few video games of the Star Trek franchise where we actually know who the writer was. We know it's you, right? Most other games, they simply don't label one. Like you can't figure out who wrote Armada or Armada 2 or Legacy or whatever, right? Which is interesting because you'd figure that somebody would want to be identified with those works if they're particularly proud of them. But you have this passion for Invasion. It was very evident in your website. So I'm just glad I was able to get you to talk about it a little bit. And I'd love to know your outline for Invasion 2 at some point because that just sounds great.
I have to dig it out. You know, what's really nice is that we're talking about a game now that's 20 years old. And I still get people sending me like fan art of the ships and still talking about, you know, the unique designs we had. I mean, because, you know, Trek techie nerds are a whole subset of Trek fandom, right? People who love just the ships and the technology. And there is a lot of love from people there who always say, oh, we love the big Typhon class, sort of like the Star Trek version of Battlestar Galactica, you know.
Exactly.
And the Valkyrie ships is one of my prized possessions actually is a guy who was a fan who built these 3D models, and he got a 3D printer, and he made me a tiny little model of a kind of that sort of scale. Oh, it's very cool.
So I've got a homeworld carrier, and I've got like a ship from Star Trek Online too. So I'm totally with you. I haven't printed out stuff from Invasion because I haven't found any good quality models of them, but I totally would.
Yeah, he built me this model of the Valkyrie Spacefighter in the same scale as the Eagle Moss ships.
Oh, nice.
So that has pride of place on my shelf. It's very cool.
All right, so we're going to move into our spoilerful section now. Dag?
Yeah, so if you're listening or watching and you don't want to be spoiled for moments asunder, pause now, stop now, go read the book, come back, and then continue listening. Also, this isn't going to be a recap like we sometimes do. This is going to be specific questions about events of moment asunder that James may or may not answer, given those laser sights that are pointed at him outside the window. Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert! So, man, I don't know. There's two really big events in this book for me that stood out, and I'm gonna go with the biggest one for me because I'd like to say that Time Zero was my coming of age into Star Trek. I'd been watching it for a couple of years, ever since Locutus, and I was a kid, but I remember when Time Zero came out. It was the first time I discovered the concept of the season finale. Like, I was conscious of it, and my mom was like, "No, it's over. You have to wait 3 months." And I was like, "What?" And I remember putting on the tube on the channel that's supposed to have Star Trek every Sunday when Star Trek came on to be like, "Is it back yet? Is it back yet? Is it back yet? Is it back yet?" And then finally it was back, and I was like so just overjoyed. So Time Zero, nostalgically, is my favorite of all of the series, even though there's other categories.
Oh, you don't know torture until you saw the Best of Both Worlds Part 1. That summer was the longest.
And I happily defer to the fandom in that regard. But my question is, how did you guys come back with the Davidians?
So we talked about who the threat force would be in the story. And pretty soon after kind of kicking around ideas, we were like, do we want it to be a person? Do we want it to be a villain in the same sense of like Q or the Borg Queen, somebody, or any like Soren from Generations, or Ruafo from Insurrection? Do we want it to be somebody, a physical person who we can have as a mouthpiece for kind of events and descriptiveness and stuff? And the more we thought about it, the more it was kind of like, if we do that, we encapsulate everything in one person, and it didn't feel big enough. And we talked about the threats that we've seen in Star Trek before, and we kept coming back, I think, to the initial kind of concept of the Borg. Before you had the Borg Queen, when they were just the collective, when they didn't have a face, per se. And that always terrified me, because fighting the Borg is like arguing with a hurricane. Right, it's like or if you go back to the Terminator thing, was it like what Reese says? It can't be bargained with, it can't be reasoned with, and it absolutely will not stop until you're dead. That's terrifying, because as human beings, we're kind of programmed to if we get into a fight with something, we can either beat it with strength or we can argue our way out of it. But if you come across something that is absolutely alien to you, and there's no way you can connect with it, and it will just roll right over you. That's terrifying, right? That's the absolute most terrifying idea there is.
There's no humanity to appeal to.
So we started looking at, well, how can we stimulate that fear, not just in our characters but in our readers? What can we touch on? And we knew that we wanted to go back and bring something from Star Trek's past. So we looked at a lot of different threat force races. And the thing about the Davidians is, if you look at what the Davidians are, they're pretty damn scary. And Time Zero, to be honest, doesn't really give them the juice and the space that they deserve, because they kind of get dealt with, and it's like, oh, we finished with that, sort it out. And I'm like, wait a minute, we're talking about a race of creatures here that are invisible, travel through time, and eat terror. How could you not crap your pants at the thought of something like that wandering around out in space, right? They're really scary. And we only really get to see a little bit of that in that episode, and we never get to see them come back. And the more we thought about it, it's like, because there's such a blank canvas, there's not been much written about them. We were free to bring them back, and we were free to build more into them. And once we kind of slotted that in, that helped us develop the main threat of the story. And we realized that we had an opportunity to not only kind of reach back to TNG and say, here's something that wasn't developed well, an interesting threat force that we can build upon, but it also dovetailed with the direction that we wanted to take it in, is this building sort of cosmic drama, this temporal apocalypse that we're creating for the novels, these guys were just a perfect fit for us. And they have that sort of, you know, force of nature quality to them, is that all they're interested in is just consuming, and they're just going to eat everything. And the way they do that is by bringing you to the absolute heights of terror. Who is not going to be absolutely frightened out of their wits by the idea of a foe like that? So once we kind of found all these points, it just came together really well. We're like, these guys are perfect for what we want.
So you reminded me of the setup for Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. What's going to be the big thing? Who do we come up with? Who's going to be the baddie? And I don't recall who did it, but someone went back into TOS and I think watched everything. And Space Seed was that episode that kind of sparked that, okay, here's the person we're going to catch up with, the interesting character that we're going to center this revenge story around. So when you're going back and going through, because TNG was certainly had a lot more seasons, movies, different choices that you could have, you could have picked. Who came up with the Davidians? Because I did not see that coming at all, and I didn't even think that. I was trying to guess who were they going to reveal this force as. I thought it was going to be something completely new. And when it turned out to be them, I was like, oh, yeah, that's great. But they were only in 2 episodes. And I get that you structured Star Trek II completely off of 1 episode of the original series. So this book is going off of an entity that was in 2 episodes. So it's more. But who came up and said, hey, the Davidians, and why them and not, say, the Iconians?
Well, you know, now I think about it, I don't remember which one of us it was who kind of said, how about these guys? I mean, I remember we had a list of possibles.
Who else was on said list?
And I'm just trying to think. I'm trying to think now. You know, I think we didn't I think the Iconians. We'd already done stories about the Iconians in the past when we did the Demons of Air and Darkness series, quite a few years ago now. So it's like we felt like they'd been done. The reason I think the Davidians work is not only did they tick all the right boxes for what we wanted as a bad guy, but because they hadn't been done. Nobody had gone back and retold that story and developed the Davidians anymore. It's like we just thought that they were a missed opportunity. So we had a chance to kind of redeem them as villains and say, you know, not only were they were dangerous, but they were way more dangerous than you think. In fact, actually, there's a scene I wrote in Ashes of Tomorrow where Picard is giving a briefing to the president of the Federation and says basically, like, the president's like, what's going on? What happened in Moments of Sundown? And it's the kind of recap scene where, well, here's what happened. Here's who these bad guys are. And he has a moment where he's kind of thinking to himself, you know, I really should have paid a bit more attention back there in the episode Times Arrow, because we dealt with those guys and we moved on, and I thought it was done. And it's interesting you say, like, you touch back on Wrath of Khan there as well. Similar thing, you know, Kirk leaves Khan behind on the planet, and he's like, oh, we're done with that. And then it comes back to bite him in the ass, right?
Oh, it sure did.
And this is a similar situation, is, you know, and Picard feels a degree of guilt. He's like, you know, we thought we dealt with these guys. We thought they were like 4 or 5 guys in a cave somewhere. And it's like, oh no, no, we're way wrong. And in fact, you know, and it's like as I said about that point that Dayton made, it's much worse than you think. And that is that's the sort of the reveal we're doing as these books go on, is every time you think you've read the first book and you think you know what's going on right now, let me tell you, it's much worse than you think.
Oh, that's definitely a given, I think, right? Like, we've only gotten 1 book and a third. We're not going to solve the mystery of who's doing what and how they're doing it in the first third of the series. Doesn't make any sense. This is our teaser. This is what they're tantalizing us with in the first book, I think.
And what you came up with was, you thought the Borg were bad? Oh, it's kind of that sort of reaction, like, well, holy shit, we did. We thought the Borg were bad. We've seen nothing.
This
and
makes
that's epic.
this makes
What I like,
I just want to quip, like, this makes the Borg digging into 8472's territory look like a mining operation compared to what's happened in Moments Asunder.
And then they got their asses kicked doing it.
Yeah.
what I like about the Davidians as bad guys is the kind of like they're very subtle and insidious right up until the point when they're not. And it's the kind of thing that just it's the kind of threat that just sneaks in through the back door, and you're not even aware it's slitting your throat until it's got the knife there.
Yeah.
Star Trek always does a great job of taking kind of real world things and sort of reflecting them in a sci-fi universe. And the thing I kept thinking is in a way the Davidians are kind of like it's a metaphor for climate change, because it's this thing that's been going on for a long time, and people who have not been paying attention to it, and now suddenly it may kill us all. Mm-hmm. And it felt like that kind of idea was in the back of my head about the real world equivalent of something. And I thought that's the kind of fear that you feel. You start thinking to yourself, oh, what if I'm I can't get out of because I wasn't paying attention and now it's already here. That sort of emotion was something that I kept coming back to every time I wanted to write about the Davidians. I kept thinking, what's it like when you wake up and go, oh my God, the call is coming from inside the house. It's already too late. It's already too late to stop it. So what do you do next? Is like, do you give up? Do you give into, and this is a thread that kind of goes through Ashes of Tomorrow, is do you give in to fatalism and you say, well, I can't do anything about this, so do I run out the clock? Or do you say, no, I'm going to fight right down to the very last second, even for the slimmest of possible opportunities to win through, because to do anything else would be to surrender. And that is something that characters in the story will talk from both of those viewpoints, because they're facing a cosmic level threat unlike anything that we've seen in the Star Trek universe before.
It's funny. So when I was in elementary, I don't remember where I heard the story, but I told the story of the calls coming from the inside of the house and just spooked these kids because the first time I heard that stuck with me for a while. That was just completely terrifying. And you're right, the Davidians are the same way. Now it's different from the Romulans, the Klingons, Ferengi. They're all right there. You've got your spies, your intelligence agencies. You can kind of keep tabs on what they're doing. You can generally catch them in the act of trying to do something big. But with the Davidians, they were practicing in other timelines, in other realities. So you had no reason to suspect them, because after the incidents in Time's Arrows, like that was the last you ever heard of them. There were no other plots or secrets or things that they were trying to do that somewhere in the Alpha Quadrant was discovered. So you had no reason to think about them or to think that they were a threat. And that's the part that's also kind of scary, is they're doing all of their operations in other timelines. So they're completely off the radar. And that's the thing, is once they were ready and had those skills honed, now it's kind of too late, because you didn't realize they were doing all of this. They weren't under the microscope of the Alpha Quadrant powers. They were just not only off the radar, they were just completely over here in a different time, different reality, different universe. And that's, you're right. It was very much the calls coming from inside the house sort of thing.
Honestly, to me, the best comparison for the story that the Davidians are running is actually a Doctor Who story. It reminds me so much of When a Good Man Goes to War, right? Which is when the Doctor goes throughout time to build up this whole thing to achieve his goal. He gets these guys from this point in time, he gets those guys from that point in time, brings them all together after he's prepared and trained with them or whatever to rescue his child or whatever, right? Here we've got the Davidians doing the same thing. They've been traveling through time, doing experiments, testing their technology, testing their metal, essentially. And then once they've prepared and finished it, they were going to go back to the present and mess with reality as they expected. So it's very similar to that little bit of story for me.
The driving force for the Davidians is it's greed, right?
Mhm.
And all of us, it's hunger, right? All of us can understand that.
Gluttony.
And with them, it's just grown and grown and grown beyond sort of like, beyond the bounds of one physical universe, beyond the bounds of one timeline, and it can't be sated. And it is going back to, like I said before, the idea of the sort of arguing with the hurricane, the force of nature is it's something that it's becoming so big, so powerful that it puts multiple timelines in danger. And the idea of the Davidians kind of having been off grid doing this all the time. I love the idea of that, is that, like, while the Federation was looking the other way, dealing with loads of other stuff, this has slowly been bubbling away in the background for decades, or even thousands of years, because the Davidians kind of, they're time travelers, so they're a time active race. So, that we don't know, they could have been doing this stuff for thousands and thousands of years into the past. And maybe just the element that we saw in Time's Arrow was they just happened to accidentally bump into something that they were doing. But in fact, this insidious plot has been going on for a very, very long time.
Yeah, time is almost immaterial to them, right? If you can spend your entire existence traveling through time, it doesn't matter whether it happened 5,000 years ago or 5,000 years hence. It's not much different for them.
If Picard blows up the cavern in 2368, then that's a milestone that the Davidians are already aware of. They've already compensated for it. They've already moved off world by that time. That's why there were only 5 dudes in a cave waiting for an away vision. They were just waiting. It totally makes sense.
Think they're the patsies. They're the guys that we'll put them here because once they're gone, everyone's going to be thrown off the scent. Can you imagine if we had time travel now? You had an army, you wanted to invade the U.S. There is no way you're going to even come close to being able to amass the military and the training needed for something like that. So you say, well, you know what? Let's go tens of thousands of years in the past, when there's in between the dinosaurs and early man, where there's no one around anywhere, and spend as much time as you need practicing and rehearsing, and then come back and you've got the whole thing figured out, and nobody was aware at all.
So, James, I wanted to ask you about a particular plot point that comes up in Moments Asunder that I'm sure is going to get more explanation as we go. So if you can't answer, that's fine. But I want to understand more about the weapon ship that Torek had extracted future data from, that he had to hide with the DTI or whatever. So here's my question about it. That's a very convenient explanation for why the timeline that our characters are in is a branching, damaged timeline. That all makes sense. Was that concept that the Rakillan weapon ship came from an alternate future already established when that book came out, or was that a retcon essentially? You guys realized, oh, that's our easy explanation for things?
I think, I mean, that's more of a question that Dayton would be able to answer better than me. But yeah, I believe, he'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the idea was always that it came from a parallel timeline. Because I think there's a moment where there's Borg ships. They're kind of like in some of the data they have, they see Borg ships, and they're like, well, if this was our timeline, there wouldn't be Borg ships there because the Borg are gone.
Right.
So there was always the idea that it jumped from a parallel reality, bringing this particular information with it. I mean,
so that did predate Coda then, because that's very interesting to me that lines up so well with the damaging of the timeline that's necessary for the Davidians to want to eat it.
It's almost like we thought of it ages ago, isn't it?
Are you sure you haven't invented time travel?
Right. That's a lot of predestination right there.
I'm just curious, again, which book did that happen in, where Torek?
That Armageddon's
Arrow.
Armageddon's Arrow.
Okay.
Was that?
I have to check that one out.
Yeah, I mean, again, Dayton will correct me if I'm wrong about this, but it was my understanding that what Dayton had done there is he built himself kind of an escape hatch. So the definition of what the information was is nicely vague, so that in future books, if there was a need to say, okay, we need the information to be this thing, then it would fit, and if we need it to be this other thing, it would also fit.
That's very clever.
He built a back door in the firewall.
Yeah, it's like if there's a trope in writing called Chekhov's gun, if you've ever heard of that.
Yep.
Yes.
And the idea is for anybody out there who's not familiar with this term, is The idea is if you're writing a 3-act play and someone uses a gun in Act 3, you need to have the gun on the table in Act 1. So people go, oh, there's a gun on the table, and then when someone picks up in Act 3 and shoots the guy, you go, oh right, okay, that makes sense. Instead of just pulling the gun out of his pocket and you go, I didn't know you had a gun. That's crazy, you know, and it feels like it hasn't been earned. So part of the stuff with the weapon ship is Dayton taking his own narrative and going, well, I can use what I already wrote to kind of lead in nicely into the events of Moments Asunder. It's, you know, it's part of the development process that we went through, is we were looking for previous books going, what can we pull together so it will feel like it makes sense? So it looks like years from now, when everybody's forgotten about this conversation we're having right now, people will go, those guys are so smart. They were planning this for years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, as far as being smart and planning things for years, like, so there's one sentence of this that I thought was brilliantly detailed inside of Moments Asunder. So there's a moment where Picard beams down onto the planet that has the future archive from the Davidians, right? It's in the future or whatever. And he notes that it reminds them of Mars after the terraforming, but before they finish putting up like additional terraforming details or whatever, right? Which reminds us that in 24th century, like Starfleet, there are 2 habitable worlds in our system, right? If you look at the Picard opening scenes where they burn Mars, essentially, they forgot. Mars is a red desert hellscape still, right? Like they'd forgotten that the the Verneron array in Mars from Enterprise was working on terraforming Mars, right? Like there's a whole big disconnect there. And I'm just really impressed that you guys remembered to terraform Mars because it doesn't come up basically ever in the show, except a couple scattered things, and they forgot it when they wrote Picard. So kudos there. I was super impressed by that tiny little snippet.
You know,
I mean, I have to say the reason Picard Mars looks like Mars is because if you made it look like terraform Mars, people wouldn't know that it was Mars.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's common denominator planning is bad.
So,
Or
you know,
all the terraforming and colonization happened over on the other side of the planet.
there you go. So,
it is a freaking planet, man.
it still looks
Right.
like red. It's nice and green with fields and stuff.
Should have just detonated a Genesis weapon on Mars. That would have been a lot faster.
Right?
But you want to keep Mars around afterwards.
That's true.
So this thing about the Requilon ship, so now is that your way of saying that even this reality that we've been in for the Bronze Era of the books, well, this is actually not even the prime timeline either. Is that what it's doing?
The books have never been the prime timeline.
Oh, well, let me reword that. Okay,
It's spelling it out for the readers, specifically saying this is not what you thought it was.
Right. It just not the prime timeline, but in regards to the books, like the books own prime timeline. Is that a way of saying, well, you might have thought it was, but psych, it's not?
Oh no. So if we want to talk about like, okay, what timelines are there in Star Trek? I mean, okay, there's a lot, right? I mean, we've got like, you know, we've got the Kelvin timeline, we've got the prime timeline, we've got the Litverse timeline, and then we've got how many other sort of little sub-branching universes that we've seen in other shows. We've also got the Star Trek Online timeline, which is slightly different. In fact, actually, I actually have a couple of little nods to characters from STO turn up in Ashes of Tomorrow.
I'll look for those. I'm a big player of the game.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I deliberately put in some STO references just to sort of say, you know, this is not, you know, what I was saying is that this is not the STO timeline, but there's no reason to believe that we can't have characters who are in that timeline in this timeline as well.
I got to get caught up on that game.
That's really
because
cool.
They all kind of, you know, they all sort of cross connect.
I do love that.
But in terms of like, you know, the timeline that we see from the future ship, that's another branching possibility.
We are running up on our time. I have one last question. You mentioned that the green light for pitches comes from the top down. Is the top now saying that there will be no more tie-in novels for the stories of this era, or should we just read Oblivion's Gate?
Well, you mean there will be no more timelines for the Litverse?
Right. Will you not be allowed to write books expanding on the characters as you've written them for the last 20 years?
Is it basically, is this like a clean cut? Is that?
Well, I don't. No one has come to me and said that, but it is my personal belief that yes, this is the end.
Okay.
Now, it doesn't mean, we're not saying that's the end for Star Trek fiction. Absolutely not.
Of course.
Clearly not.
There are more Star Trek stories coming. You know, but the continuity we created here in the Litverse, and that ongoing narrative, that serial narrative, this is the conclusion of that. But there will be more Star Trek stories, and you know, if we bring back elements that we created in the Litverse and do new incarnations of them in novels, I have already done that. I have already brought characters back from my Litverse Titan novels in my Star Trek Picard Titan novel.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
You know, it's like it's a little bit. We've talked a lot about the way the guys over in the galaxy far, far away in the Star Wars universe have dealt with what we're having right now. You know, just kind of dropped the hammer and they said, "That's it, no more."
Right.
You know, you didn't give an opportunity to kind of close them off. What we're lucky here that with Star Trek, because of the nature of Star Trek, and Star Trek is something that has parallel realities and multiple timelines. We're lucky that we get to tell a story like this that does bring closure to that narrative.
I love it.
That was in the afterword of Moments Asunder. It was just for the Star Wars EU, just one day, done, gone.
And we didn't want to do that because, you know, we felt like that would do a disservice to the readership and to all the writers and to all of the work that's been done. Now, if you take a look at what's going on in the Star Wars universe now, you will see that the ongoing continuity of Star Wars is they're cherry picking cool bits out of the Litverse, the Star Wars Litverse, going, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, they're bringing back Thrawn,
cool.
They're bringing back this. Yeah, they're picking and choosing.
It's like the buffet effect, right? You go, well, that looks tasty. I'll have a little of that. I don't fancy the broccoli, but maybe I'll have some of the ham. You know, you pull the little bits out, and you have that, and you put that on your plate, right? There is no reason why we won't be able to do that with Star Trek moving forward. Now, I don't know if there are any plans. I'm not privy to any information about that. This is my personal hope that, you know, going forward, if there is a piece of storyline, a character, an element that is cool from the Litverse, is that, yeah, maybe we can port that across. There's no reason why we can't do that. What we're on the verge now of a brand new era in Star Trek storytelling, where everything old is new again, where the slate has been cleared, and we can tell new stories. We can even maybe bring back characters that we wrote about and tell stories about them in completely different ways. I love the idea of, you know, somebody picking up a future novel and saying, oh, this character from the Litverse is in it. I know everything about them. And then the story goes in a completely different direction and does something totally unexpected and completely pulls the rug out from underneath you. I think that would be so cool to see somebody do something like that. So this is an opportunity for us to kind of refresh and renew. And, you know, I think Dayton put it best. He said, we're changing lanes here. We're kind of pulling the freeway onto a different road, and we're moving into synchronicity with what's being done on the television shows. And that will be the direction that we take moving forward.
Right on.
I love it. I love it. James, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. Renzo, Big J, glad to be here with you as always. For the audience, this is part 2 of our 3-part interview session. We'll be back next month with David Mack to roll out Oblivion's Gate. In the meantime, if you're listening to this right now, Ashes of Tomorrow is available today. Go pick up that book. Pick up Moments Asunder and read that one first if you haven't already. And thank you for always going boldly with Beyond Trek Podcast. Hey, everybody. I just wanted to give a quick shout out to our Patreon and Anchor supporters. Big thanks to Stephanie Baker, S. Tam, Anne Marie, Jim Cook, and Nora Hickson. We really appreciate your support. Thanks for being a part of Beyond Trek Podcast.
We are Beyond Trek Podcast. Lower your inhibitions and surrender your ears. We will add inspirational and hilarious Trek content to your day. Your attention will adapt to subscribe to us. Resistance is futile.